When the walls of your city finally fall, what is your greatest fear? Is it the sword? The fire? The swift, chaotic end in the smoke and the shouting? For centuries, this was the binary fate of the vanquished. A quick, merciful death on a soldier's blade, or a brutal, agonizing one. But what if the soldiers who breach your home, who storm your church, are not there to kill you? What if, in the midst of the slaughter, they stop? What if they look at you, truly look at you, and see not an enemy to be slain, but a resource to be harvested? This was the cold, calculated reality of Ottoman conquest. In the 5th, 10th, 16th, and 17th centuries, as the Ottoman Empire swelled to become a global superpower, it was fueled by an insatiable, systematic, and bureaucratic appetite for human beings. And while captured enemy men were often put to the sword or conscripted into hard labor, the fate of the women was something else entirely. It was a fate meticulously designed to be worse than death. It was not a quick end, but a slow, methodical erasure. It was a living death, a systematic journey from person to a thing, from a human being with a name, a family, and a faith, to a piece of imperial property. This is the story of how the Ottoman state, in its relentless genius, perfected a system of conquest that did not just defeat its enemies. It consumed them, body and soul, and used their very blood to build its new world. To understand this grim history, we must first abandon our modern, romanticized notions of the harem, of silks, jewels, and seductive odalisques. The reality was a bureaucratic institution, a system of sexual slavery, and a political engine as vital to the empire as its armies or its treasuries. When an Ottoman raiding party, the Akonki, swept through a Hungarian, Polish, or Circassian village, or when the Sultan's armies conquered a great city like Constantinople, the capture of women was not a chaotic byproduct of war. It was a primary objective. The Islamic laws of war at the time were clear and codified. The inhabitants of a city that resisted conquest were forfeit. They became the legal property, the asir, of the conquerors. This was not a legal gray area. It was a state-sanctioned, state-run enterprise. 1/5 of all spoils, including human spoils, was the pengik, the 1/5 tax reserved by law for the Sultan himself. The thesis of this system was simple and brutal. An enemy killed is just an enemy dead. An enemy captured, broken, assimilated, and forced to serve the empire. And more horrifyingly, to birth the next generation of the empire is a total victory. This system was a living death because its first, essential act was the complete and total murder of an identity. Death on the battlefield was an end to a life. This was the end of a self. The journey from a free woman to an imperial slave was a process of calculated psychological demolition. It had distinct, terrifying stages, each designed to sever another tie to her past. The first stage was the capture. Imagine the scene. You are Katerina, a young woman in a village in the Balkans. You have a family, a home, a name, a faith you have practiced your entire life. The raiders come at dawn. Your brothers and father are cut down trying to defend you. You are dragged from your home. This is the first trauma, the violence of the Akonki, the raiders whose entire purpose was to destabilize the frontier and bring back booty. You are not the only one. You are tied to a line of other women and children, forced on a death march that can last for weeks. Many die on the way from disease, starvation, or abuse. This is the second trauma, the commodification. You are no longer a person. You are cargo. When you arrive in a great Ottoman city like Bursa, Erasure, or the teeming capital of Constantinople, you are taken to the Esir Pazari, the slave market. This is the third and most profound trauma, the public dehumanization. European travelers from the era described these markets with a mixture of horror and fascination. The captives were paraded onto a block, stripped naked in public, and subjected to the most intimate and humiliating inspections. Potential buyers would open their mouths, inspect their teeth, their hands, their limbs, their naked bodies, searching for physical flaws or signs of disease. They were poked, prodded, and haggled over like livestock. This was the moment your humanity was legally and publicly extinguished. You were a Kari, a concubine, a slave. You were sold for a sum of Aki's silver coins. But the erasure had only just begun. If you were purchased by a wealthy pasha, or most fatefully, selected for the Sultan's own Imperial Harem, the next stage would begin immediately. Your name, the very word that defined you, was taken. Katerina no longer existed. You are now given a new poetic and utterly alien name. A slave name, a name like Golbahar, Spring Rose, Mahidevran, Moon of Fortune, or Harem, the cheerful one. Your name was gone. Next was your faith. You were, by force, converted to Islam. You were taught the prayers, the customs, the language. To speak your native tongue, to even whisper the prayers of your old faith, was a punishable offense. It was a severing of your link not just to your family, but to your God. Finally, your past itself was forbidden. You are not allowed to speak of your home, your family, or your old life. To do so was to show disloyalty, to be unbroken. You are now, in every legal and practical sense, a new person. A person born on the day she was sold. You had no past, no family, no home. Your only loyalty, your only life, your only hope was now directed at a single person, your master. This systematic destruction of the self-name, faith, language, and memory was the foundation of the entire system. It was a psychological vivisection, leaving behind a hollowed obedience shell, ready to be filled with a new singular purpose. And for the women who entered the Sultan's palace, that purpose was the most high-stakes, terrifying gamble in the world. To be one of the women chosen for the Imperial Harem was, in the eyes of the world, the greatest fortune a captured woman could have. It was to be rescued from the filth of the common market and brought into a world of unimaginable luxury: silken pillows, jeweled clothing, fragrant baths, and gilded halls. This is the greatest deception of all. The Imperial Harem was not a palace of pleasure. It was a prison, a school, and a political battlefield, all run with iron-fisted bureaucratic precision. And the prize for winning its game was survival. The cost of losing was a different kind of living death. When a new woman, a Kari, entered the harem, she entered a rigid, female-dominated hierarchy ruled by the most powerful woman in the empire, the valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother. Often a former slave concubine herself, the valid Sultan was the warden of this gilded cage. The new girl would begin her education. She would be taught to read and write Ottoman Turkish, to play music, to dance, to sew, and most importantly, the intricate rules of palace etiquette and the art of pleasing. This was not an education for enlightenment. It was the training of a high-class commodity. She was being groomed for one purpose, and one purpose only: to one day be presented to the Sultan. This is where the hot topic, the sexual nature of the harem, must be understood in its true, cold, political context. The harem's primary function was not the Sultan's pleasure. It was dynastic reproduction. The entire system was a stroke of ruthless political genius. For centuries, the sultans had a problem: rival noble families. If a sultan married a Turkish or an Anatolian noblewoman, her family would then have a claim to the throne, leading to civil war. The slave concubine system solved this. The sultan no longer married noble women. He had children only with his foreign, captured slaves. Women like Harem, the daughter of a Ruthenian priest, or Kaziam, the daughter of a Greek priest. These women had no family. They had no name. They had no power base. They were his property. Their entire existence, and the existence of their children, was tied directly and only to him. It was a system designed to create a royal bloodline with no allegiances but to the Sultan himself. And this is where the true horror, the true worse-than-death gamble began. A woman's life in the harem was a brutal corporate ladder. If she was chosen by the Sultan, she might become a Gizdi, the favored one. If she continued to hold his favor, she might become an Iqbal, the favorite. If she became pregnant, and crucially, bore him a son, she won. She ascended to the rank of Caden, one of his official consorts. Her life now had a single, terrifying purpose: to ensure that her son, and not the son of another concubine, would one day take the throne. The harem became a viper's nest of brutal, silent, political warfare. The concubines were not allies. They were rivals in a zero-sum game. They would poison one another. They would slander each other to the Sultan. They would maneuver to have rival sons sent away to distant governorships. They would forge alliances with viziers and generals in the outside world, because they all knew the ultimate bloody rule of the Ottoman dynasty. This was the Law of Fratricide, codified by Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror. When a new sultan ascended the throne, his very first act of state was to order the execution of all of his half-brothers. All of them. This was not seen as murder. It was a regrettable necessity to prevent civil war for the good of the realm. Now, imagine you are that captured woman. You are Golbahar. You have survived the raid, the market, the loss of your name and faith. You have entered the harem. You have caught the Sultan's eye, and you have borne him a son. For 20 years, this boy has been your entire world. He is your only link to power, to status, to survival. He is your entire life's work. And on the day the old Sultan dies, the terrifying race begins. If your son makes it to the palace throne room first and declares himself Sultan, you have won the ultimate prize. You are now the valid Sultan, the Queen Mother, the single most powerful woman in the empire. But if the son of your rival, the son of the woman you have plotted against for 2 decades, gets there first, you will hear a knock on your son's door. You will see the royal executioners, the mute deaf-mutes, enter with a silk bowstring, because it was forbidden to shed royal blood. You will be forced to stand by, helpless, as your son, the entire purpose of your existence, is ritualistically and silently strangled to death. This was the fate of Mahidevran, the rival of the famous Harem Sultan. She was forced to watch her brilliant son, Qazaid Mustafa, be strangled on the order of his own father, Suleiman, after Harem had convinced the Sultan he was a traitor. And what happens to you, the mother of the murdered prince? You are not killed. That would be a mercy. You are pensioned off. You are sent to the Eski Sere, the old palace, a palace in a different part of the city. It was known as the Palace of Tears. There, you will join all the other living ghosts, the mothers, sisters, and daughters of all the other executed princes and dead sultans. You will live out the rest of your natural life in obscurity, in relative comfort, but in a state of total social and political death. You will be a walking corpse, a living monument to a failed gamble. Death on a battlefield is an end. It is tragic, it is violent, but it is final. The fate of the captured woman in the Ottoman system was a denial of that finality. It was a sentence to a lifetime of precarious survival in a game where the rules were alien and the stakes were absolute. This was the genius and the ultimate horror of the Ottoman machine. It did not just vanquish its enemies, it metabolized them. It took a girl from a conquered land, murdered her past, and forged her into a political tool. It took her body, her biology, and weaponized it in a savage internal war for succession. The women who won this war, the slave girls who became the great queen mothers, the valid sultans, became some of the most powerful women in human history. They ruled an empire, but they did so from a gilded cage, their thrones built on a foundation of erased identities, dead rivals, and all too often, the bodies of their own children's brothers. The woman who was spared the sword on the day of her capture was not saved. She was conscripted into a different, longer, and quieter war. A war fought not with steel, but with whispers, with poison, with the birth of a child, and with a hope held for decades that her child would be the one to kill and not the one to be killed. This was the grim reality of the harem. It was not a fantasy of pleasure. It was a factory of power, fueled by the living ghosts of captured enemies.